Nobody in the royal family has been humiliated more quietly, or more completely, than Prince Edward. He was called a wimp on international television. His company collapsed to £40.27. His own family looked the other way. And for 60 years, the world agreed on one thing about him. He did not matter. But in 2025, something shifted. King Charles started sending him to America, again and again, city after city, and every single time Edward landed, Harry was only a few miles away. The palace has not explained it. The press has not connected it. But the pattern is there. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is not a coincidence story. This is not a diplomatic scheduling story. This is the story of two men inside the same broken system, separated by 20 years and 1,000 different choices, now slowly drifting toward the same place. And the reason behind it is far sadder than most people realize. To understand what is happening right now, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the palaces or the titles or the ceremonial photographs. You have to go back to what it actually felt like to grow up as the youngest Windsor child in a family that had already used up most of its warmth. Edward was born in 1964, the fourth child of Queen Elizabeth II. By the time he arrived, his brother Charles was already 16. His sister Anne was 13. Andrew was 4. The family story had already been written. The spotlight had already settled on the older children, and Edward grew up in the space that was left over. Not unwanted, not unloved, but quietly overlooked in the way that only a youngest child in a very large, very formal household can understand. He was the one the cameras moved past. The one the headlines forgot to mention. The one who was always at the edge of the frame. That would have been hard enough on its own. But the pressure that came next made it worse. Prince Philip had a very specific idea of what a Windsor man should be. Tough, military, controlled. He had served in World War II. He admired discipline the way other men admire beauty. So when Edward was old enough, he was sent down the same path as his brothers. The Royal Marines. One of the most brutal training programs in the British military. The kind of course designed to break ordinary men and rebuild them as something harder. Edward lasted 4 months. In January 1987, he quit. And that one decision followed him for the next 30 years like a shadow that never moved. The press called him weak. American newspapers called him worse. His mother, by all accounts, was deeply disappointed. His father's reaction was more complicated. Some reports said anger, others said a private understanding that never made it into the headlines. But the public version was simple and brutal. The prince had quit. That was the story. That was the label. And labels in royal life have a way of becoming permanent. What happened next was almost designed to make things worse. A few months after leaving the Marines, Edward organized a charity event called It's a Royal Knockout. Royals in costumes, celebrities in silly games. 30 million people watching a prince who had just been called a quitter now dressed up and stumbling around for television cameras. The palace hated it. The public found it embarrassing. And when journalists at the press conference afterward failed to respond to his question with enough enthusiasm, Edward snapped. He pointed at photographers. He swore. He stormed out. It was a 23-year-old man having a very human moment in a very unforgiving public space. But that is not how it was reported. It became proof that he was unstable, unsuitable, not built for royal life. The image stuck. And for a long time, the image was what people saw when they looked at him. He tried again in 1993. He founded a television production company called Ardent Productions and tried to build something real for himself. He even handed out business cards that said Edward Windsor, not His Royal Highness. He wanted to be taken seriously as a producer, not protected as a prince. For a while, there was something genuinely brave about that. No child of a British monarch had tried to build a private career in entertainment before. It was an unusual kind of courage. But courage is not the same as success. The company struggled to land serious commissions. Critics found the programming average. The royal name that he had tried to leave at the door kept following him through it anyway, and people kept asking the same uncomfortable question. Was he getting work because he was talented or because of who his mother was? He never got a clean answer. Then, when a camera crew from his own company turned up at St. Andrews University to film Prince William without palace permission, the damage was done. The family was furious. Charles was furious. Trust inside the institution cracked. And the company slowly bled out. By the time Ardent was dissolved in 2009, the financial report told a story so bleak it almost felt fictional. Investors had put in over £2 million. The final liquidation left assets of £40.27. That number became a symbol. Not because of how much it represented. Because of how little. The dream had not just failed. It had disappeared into almost nothing. And here is where most people stopped paying attention to Edward. Here is where the narrative closed. Failed the Marines. Embarrassed the family. Built a company that collapsed into £40. Case closed. Move on. But something else was quietly happening. Something nobody was writing about. Because Edward, despite everything, kept working. Not in the dramatic public way that attracts cameras. In the steady, unglamorous way that serious people work when they are not performing for an audience. He became a trustee of the Duke of Edinburgh's award, the program his father had built and which had, by the time Philip died in 2021, reached more than 8 million young people across 130 countries. Edward did not just protect it. He helped run it globally. He traveled for it. He showed up for it in cities and countries where the royal family rarely sent anyone at all. In 2018, he spent 12 days crossing 9 American cities, meeting Gold Award recipients, attending more than 40 events, doing the kind of intensive diplomatic groundwork that would have made front-page news if any more famous Windsor had done it. But it was Edward, so it passed quietly. That is the central irony of his life. The work was real. The results were real. The impact was real. But because the person doing it had been labeled a long time ago, the world had already decided how to see him. And it kept seeing him that way long after the evidence had changed. Then, in the space of 18 months, the emotional center of Edward's world collapsed. Prince Philip died in April 2021. Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022. 18 months apart. Two losses so close together that there was barely space to breathe between them. Philip had been the source of the pressure Edward grew up under, yes. But he had also been a father. And Elizabeth had been something beyond a mother. She was the anchor of the entire family. The one person everyone else organized themselves around. When she was gone, the monarchy did not just change structurally. It changed emotionally. Something went quiet at the center of it that had never been quiet before. And in that new silence, Edward had to figure out what he was now, and where he fit, and whether any of it still made sense. He was 58 years old. He had spent his entire adult life trying to be useful inside a system that had repeatedly made him feel insufficient. His television company was gone. His father was gone. His mother was gone. His title, the Duke of Edinburgh, finally came to him on his 59th birthday in 2023, delivered by King Charles. An honor. But also, if you look at it honestly, a recognition that arrived 30 years late. Something that should have felt triumphant instead carried a strange, muted ache. This was not celebration. This was correction. And then Harry's situation started pulling at something deeper. Harry left frontline royal life in 2020. He and Meghan moved to California and began dismantling their connection to the institution one public statement at a time. The family responded with silence, then coldness, then the kind of institutional distance that the Windsors have always been very good at performing. Charles and William did not reach back. The gap grew wider. And it has stayed wide. But Edward's response was different. When asked about the situation in 2021, he did not perform the official line. He called it very sad. He said every family has problems. He wished Harry and Meghan the very best. And then he said something that most royals would never say out loud. He said he stayed way out of it. That is not the answer of someone who agrees with the institution's coldness. That is the answer of someone who understands the pain and has chosen not to weaponize it. People who know Edward have suggested for years that he has more sympathy for Harry than the palace would be comfortable with. That he may privately believe Charles should make a real effort to speak to his son. That he sees in Harry's frustration something he once felt himself. The suffocation of a system that demands performance and offers very little room for the actual human being underneath the title. Edward never left. He absorbed the pressure. He bent to it. He found a way to keep going inside the institution that had repeatedly made him feel like a failure. Harry did not. Harry chose the door. And both choices make sense when you understand what was on the other side of staying. Now look at what is happening right now in 2025. King Charles is dealing with a cancer diagnosis that the palace has kept carefully vague. Princess Catherine spent much of 2024 recovering from major surgery. Princess Anne had her own health concerns. Prince Andrew remains untouchable after scandal. Harry is in California. The working royal family, the people who can actually show up and represent the crown without causing a crisis, is thinner than it has been in decades. Into that gap, Charles has been sending Edward. Washington in January 2025 for Jimmy Carter's state funeral, where Edward was the only royal in the room, standing alone among world leaders, carrying the full weight of royal representation by himself. Newark in April. Philadelphia in May. City after city in a country that has, for the past 5 years, been associated in the public imagination with Harry and Meghan. There is no official statement. There is no formal announcement. But the shape of what is happening is visible if you are willing to look at it clearly. Edward is being positioned. Carefully. Quietly. In the way that all things in the Windsor family happen. Not with a press release. With a pattern. And underneath the official reason for every trip, the Duke of Edinburgh award work, the diplomatic duties, the representation of the king, there is another question that royal watchers keep returning to. Is Edward also being used as a quiet bridge? Is Charles sending the one Windsor that Harry has always trusted to somewhere close enough that a private conversation becomes possible? Not a summit. Not a negotiation. Just a brother who understands. Just someone from inside the system who never pretended the system was perfect. Nobody will confirm that. Nobody in the palace ever confirms anything that actually matters. But the geography tells its own story. And the timing tells its own story. And the choice of Edward, specifically, tells its own story. Because here is the truth that makes all of this genuinely sad, and not just strategically interesting. Edward is not moving toward America because he chose it. He is moving toward America because there is nowhere left to move inside the institution that shaped him. The family is diminished. The senior core is strained. The people who were supposed to carry the weight are either gone, or ill, or in California, or damaged beyond public recovery. And the man who was never supposed to matter, the one who failed the Marines and lost the company and stood at the edge of every family photograph, is now one of the only people left who can be trusted to do the job without making it worse. There is something in that which cuts deeper than politics or palace strategy. Edward spent 60 years trying to prove himself to a family and an institution that largely declined to notice. He worked quietly while others were celebrated loudly. He absorbed failure and kept moving while others were given grace he was not. And now, when the monarchy is under genuine pressure and the people at the center of it are unavailable, he is the answer they reach for. Not because he became brilliant. Not because he transformed into something dramatic and undeniable. But because he stayed. Because he kept showing up in empty rooms and doing serious work and not making it about himself. Because the one quality the institution never gave him credit for, his quiet reliability, turned out to be the exact quality the institution needed most when everything else started to crack. And somewhere in California, Harry is watching the same family that pushed him out now leaning on the brother who understood him better than most. The brother who stayed. Who kept quiet. Who said very sad and meant it, and then looked away before the camera could make it into something it was not. Two princes. Two different answers to the same unbearable question. What do you do when the institution you were born into does not have room for who you actually are? Harry walked away. Edward stayed and waited. And now, in the quietest possible way, the world is beginning to move toward both of them at once. Whether they ever meet in that middle space, whether there is a conversation that Charles cannot arrange through official channels, Whether Edward is a bridge or simply a coincidence in a geography that keeps overlapping with grief, nobody outside a very small circle knows. But the pattern is there. The sadness is there. And the story of the forgotten prince, the one who quit and failed and was overlooked and kept going anyway, is not over. It is just reaching the part that nobody predicted. The part where the man nobody watched turns out to be the one the whole family was quietly depending on all along.